headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Now, has he said he wants to transition as a woman? I think he said in his statement that he wanted to be trans, but he certainly said so far that he said he still wants to be referred to as he, him. His pronouns will remain male pronouns. Can he be trans and not do anything, I think, is one of the questions I always have about this.
Well, I have absolute sympathy for Jamie Wallis. I don't share his politics one iota, but, you know, as someone who has come out with gender dysphoria, who wishes to, in future, be trans, it was a very brave thing to do. And particularly in the context of his blackmail victimization and his rape, those are very, very, well, very sensitive things, which it takes a lot of courage to be open about. So I have full praise for him on that score. But I have found his statement somewhat confusing, because he's basically saying that he wants to be trans, so he's a would-be trans person, but he's not yet trans. And he still seems to be saying that he's male identified and he wants to be known as he and him. So that would indicate that he really hasn't begun that process. So it is a little bit confusing. And I think it sort of raises some questions about, well, when and how is he going to progress this? That's, of course, entirely his prerogative and up to him. But obviously we all want to be respectful towards him, but it's hard to do that when he's saying, you know, I still want to be referred to as a man.
Well, that's one of the things that confused me about this, because if Jamie Wallis had come out and said, I'm trans, I want you to call me Janine or something from now on, in a way it would be less confusing. I mean, one of the things that's on my mind is presuming that he remains Jamie Wallis, remains, the man he is, does he still get referred to as trans?
I think it's hard to. I mean, if he is continuing to assert a male identity and, you know, asking people to use male pronouns, that's hard to square with being trans. Of course, we must accept that he has a gender dysphoria diagnosis. That's indisputable. But, you know, calling him a trans MP, I don't think he's yet a trans MP. But of course, when he is, you know, I will absolutely accept and praise that.
Now, you got into a bit of controversy this week on this, because you initially said, you welcomed his announcement and said, and you just mentioned this, referred to this. You said at the beginning, you know, it was an important step, and then you slightly rode back on this, and you said, would-be trans MP Jamie Wallis is no hero. And these are your words. You said he was sacked as a local councillor for not attending council meetings, a director of more than 10 companies that had 800 complaints, voted against climate change and crackdowns on tax avoidance, supports harsh laws on refugees. It doesn't matter what gender you are if you're not doing your job properly. Do you have to agree with all of your politics, Peter Tatchell, to be a hero?
No, of course not. But I do think that it is a bit contradictory, some of his public stances, with his supposed commitment to trans rights, because his policy, his very harsh anti-immigration, anti-refugee policy, will impact trans people who are fleeing persecution abroad. So he wants to keep a very tight, harsh refugee policy, and that will have a negative effect on trans people who are fleeing countries where they are persecuted. So that's tough to square. And of course, you know, some of his other policies also will have negative impacts upon trans people.
But hang on, Peter Tatchell. I mean, one of the things you criticise him for is you say that he voted against crackdowns on tax avoidance. Surely you can vote against crackdowns on tax avoidance and still be from a sexual minority, can't you?
Of course, absolutely. But it doesn't mean to say I can agree and support Jamie Wallis in his sought trans identity, absolutely 100%. But I don't have to agree or praise some of his other policies. His political policies, I think, should be open to scrutiny and criticism, just like mine are.
I suppose what I'm trying to get to is it sort of slightly suggests that there, as it were, good trans people and bad trans people, like good gays and bad gays, as opposed to just trans people and gay people and, you know, have policy differences or whatever.
No, I mean, you know, on trans issues and LGBT issues wider, of course, you know, we are part of a wider community and we must oppose discrimination and prejudice and hate crime. But I think it's also fair and reasonable to hold up to scrutiny people in our community who do or say things that have a destructive, harmful effect on others. You know, just because I'm gay doesn't mean to say I should be immune from criticism. You know, people do criticize me and I accept their right to criticize me. Just because I'm gay, I shouldn't get a free pass. And just because Jamie wants to be trans, he shouldn't get a free pass about his political policies, which many people in this country would find very, very offensive.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up, but before we do, let me just ask you one other question, Peter Tatchell. Of course, Jamie Wallis, his career to date was quite controversial, and not the things you list particularly, but things like what I mentioned, cutting off a whole Welsh village from the internet after a car crash you didn't explain, and much more. It's striking that actually Jamie Wallis, having had some criticism, after he made this announcement, it seemed like he was only a hero. Certainly for the Conservative Party, and many of his colleagues immediately said how brave he was. Is there a level of cynicism in my mind, or perhaps in the minds of some listeners, when they consider that coming out as trans seems to have, let's say, got Jamie Wallis out of a certain number of sticky situations?
Well, that might be a view, and only time will tell how this transpires. I'm just judging him on what he said about being trans, which I wholly support, but at the same time criticizing some of the policies he advocates, which I think are damaging not only to LGBT people, but also to the wider country. And that's my right, just as he has his right to hold his point of view.
Absolutely right. Peter Tatchell, thank you so much for joining us.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.